Hello and welcome to this edition of Back Chat at the Arc in Headingley. My name's Richard Stead, looking after things for Dave Woods, and I've got three members of the Rugby League media with me. Not sure what the collective term is, so we'll go for a po-face of pundits. Firstly, from League Weekly, Danny Lockwood, representing 4020 magazine, Phil Caplan, and wearing the League Express colours, Martyn Sadler. Firstly, Danny, Wayne Bennett was in town this weekend. What do you think he'll have made of the most recent round of Super League fixtures?
Well, I think he would have been serially impressed, Richard. It was the worst weekend of action that I can remember. One or two highlights here or there. But I think we really did save our worst for the best, and that's what Wayne Bennett is. He's the best coach in the game. I don't think there's any question about that. We would have wanted to put on a show for him this weekend. I believe the first game he went to was Huddersfield and Wakefield, which was a 2-0 thriller at half-time before Wakefield ran away with it in the end 10-2. But that came on the back of some pretty dire fare with Castleford Widnes and then Warrington Hull. So I just hope that he doesn't take this as being the best showcase that we've got, because it really wasn't.
Salford and Leeds as well, which wasn't a great watch, to be honest. If it had just been two teams and it was down to form, you could understand it, but the fact that it's virtually every team this round apart from maybe Caplan, there are wider issues here. Surely we're at the halfway point of the season and the standard is going down.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, you can never guarantee that every game is going to be great. I mean, whatever sport you follow, some games are better than others. I mean, I'm a great boxing fan, and some fights are better than others. Some fights you think are going to be marvellous are not very good, and sometimes the fights you don't expect much of turn out to be terrific. So it's the same with Rugby League, and it's the same with any sport. I thought the Catalan-St Helens game was actually a tremendous game on Saturday, by far the best game of the weekend, it seems. I thought Saints actually, for about 40 minutes, showed a lot of improvement over their recent form. So you're going to get up and down, but I do think, just coming back to your point, Phil, I think the problem we've got is that the season is too long.
Absolutely.
And squads are not deep enough. I think a lot of players are playing with injury at the moment, and I think that's the problem.
Well, you seem to be saying, Martin, that it was just down to a little bit of bad luck, and that we had 4 train crashes in one weekend. I can't quite accept that, because it was. You can't even say it was unseasonably wet for England. You know, we're in the middle of June. There were some greasy conditions. We had excuses in the Warrington Hull game that the balls were new.
Yeah, well,
I don't think this is not -5 degrees with hail coming down sideways, is it?
Yeah.
These guys are over £100,000 a year to play rugby league, and the fundamental part of that game is carrying a ball. We're not even asking them to pass it skillfully, execute great kicks. They couldn't carry a ball, and that Warrington Hull game, I thought, was the worst I've seen.
I'm with you on this, that this is indicative of something that actually needs wider debate.
So Eddie Jones has a point, is what you're all saying?
Well, actually, there is a grain of truth in what he said, and we didn't respond particularly well.
Do you want to reference what he said, Richard?
Yeah.
Well, just very detrimental against the skill levels in Super League.
And also that it's become a bit of a
Rugby League generally, he didn't say Super League, he said Rugby League generally, didn't he?
And of course you could point to, the grand final in the NRL last year and as all the evidence you need that there's as much skill as you would ever want to see.
I don't think it's just...
I think there is an issue about, there is a residual effect from last year of playing an extra 3 games without increasing the salary cap, without increasing the squad size, without then having a reserve grade. You're bringing that into this season. We're only just over halfway through. The incident of injury is as high, if not higher, than ever before.
Sure. I still don't think...
And all of this needs to be...
I mean, no one is immune from a bad game. Origin 1, a couple of weeks ago, was a terrible game.
As was the Australia-New Zealand Test match.
But you get that at top elite level, even at soccer, the last 3 World Cups.
You get it anyway, Phil, and I think there was an element of bad luck to the fact that we had so many train crashes last week. We seem to be saying that we were just struck by bad luck, and I don't accept that, because I think this is just a fundamental skill issue here. And Eddie Jones, the England Rugby Union coach, actually could not have said, as inflammatory as his words were, he could not have said them at a more timely moment, because we saw a lousy Origin 1 game on the back of a terrible Australia-New Zealand game.
But those are terrible. Those were poor games for quite different reasons. Those were poor games because the teams in those cases didn't take any risks, played in a completely unadventurous style.
Which
They
you
didn't
get
necessarily
in any
make that
sport.
many errors. But over the weekend, I mean, I watched the All Blacks playing Wales at Rugby Union.
Sorry to hear that.
And the All Blacks made 20 odd errors, actually more than the error count of either Warrington or Hull last Friday night. But nobody made a great thing about it.
But I think there's a fundamental issue here that we're missing if we don't look at the incidence of injury,
Well,
which
I think
affects
that's
the
right.
skill
I
level.
do agree with you on that.
And again, we don't do enough research. We don't take into account that there isn't a long enough close season to practice these kind of skills.
Agree with you entirely.
And we're almost moving from one season now straight into the next. The toll on the players in training and in playing is becoming almost
too great.
impossible to manage.
Well, unless they've all broken 10 fingers, I
No, but
can't find an excuse for what we witnessed last week.
But then we interviewed.
But the key thing is the key thing is whether it happens again this weekend and the weekend after. You know, it's perfectly possible to have one-off weekends where the matches are not that
But this
great.
isn't a one-off weekend. The standard of Super League overall, year on year, is lessening. That's also happening because a lot of our star players are moving to the NRL.
Well, let's move
That's
this on
true.
because we need to look at the league structure as well, I think, because we have 4 or 5 games remaining. We already know the top 4.
And the middle four.
And the middle 4.
And the bottom 4.
And the bottom 4, exactly.
But not the order they're
Do you
gonna-
want to sit here, Phil?
No, that's
Because I
fine.
was going to say to you first, do we need to re-look at what's going on? Because this was not what the new Super League format was designed to bring out of these teams, was it?
I think there's 2 or 3 issues again with that.
Sure.
The first one is that every minute is supposed to matter. That mantra hasn't gone away just because we've had it for one season. And round about week 16 of 23, we knew virtually the finishing areas that teams were going to end up in. That means that the 8s themselves, particularly teams 5, 6, 7 and 8, have no meaning. And the worry of that is that for Castleford last year, who were in that group of teams, they lost £100,000 when those games were on. It's going to be very difficult to promote those matches.
I just hope that this isn't about a mindset thing. We saw Wakefield last year after 6-7 weeks of the season saying we're writing off the first 23 rounds. We're just going to focus on the qualifying 8s. And there was a sense that if you made it into that 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th spot, Casa Park perhaps, that you'd survive for this year and then you were just going to breeze through the end of the season. We haven't quite got there yet, Phil.
No.
We have seen massive changes in fortune. We saw Widnes running away with things early on. They're showing a little bit of form, though not quite as much. You know, Catalans and Hull, you could argue, haven't had their blip yet. Are they going to have one? Looking at the league table now, those 5, 6, 7, 8 teams are still playing for position 4, I would argue. Yeah, and it is still very doable.
I'm not sure. Do you really think it is doable?
Well,
They're a long way behind.
we've got 4 or 5 weeks to go. Yeah, we've never seen a season like this in terms of looking at Leeds and Huddersfield at the bottom, the resurgence of.
But
Hull.
those issues are nothing to do with the structure.
They're nothing to do with the structure. But if we're going to criticise the structure, we've got to at least let it play out. I think if we sat here in 2 or 3 months' time, just saying, well, you know what? Just didn't work again. We have to ask questions, but I think those questions, as you've alluded to, are more about reserve grades,
Absolutely, absolutely,
and close seasons, and a wiser use of resources than just the structure of the ladder.
Hull fans won't
Nigel Wood
criticise
is-
the structure,
Nigel Wood is-
Martyn, will they?
Sorry?
Hull fans won't be criticising the structure.
I'm sure they won't, but Nigel Wood has said that the structure will be in place for 3 years, 3 seasons,
But
and
this
then
is
it'll be
Rugby League.
reviewed. Well, yeah, it is Rugby League, but I'm fairly sure that it'll still be here again next year, and then perhaps it might change. But the whole point is that bringing this new structure in moved the regular season up from 27 games to 30 games.
Absolutely.
And it comes back to Phil's point. That places intolerable pressure, I think, on the clubs and the players. I think it's a crazy system.
But
It's
we've taken out the mid-season internationals or exiles games. We've taken out a Challenge Cup round or 2. If you are in the top 4,
That's
Martyn,
true.
you've got a playoff round less than you had in the past. So overall, I
But
don't
we're
think
still
it's
starting
massively
the season
different.
at the beginning of February and
Yeah,
finishing in the middle of October, excluding internationals,
Yeah.
and it's too long. And it's affecting the standard of play, and also familiarity is breeding contempt. We look at the attendance at the Warrington Hull game this weekend. 1 versus 2. Yes, move from a Sunday to a Friday for television, but 10,000 people.
Well, you know, I mean, you couldn't.
But these teams could be playing each other 3 more times.
But geographically, you can't get worse than on a Friday evening trying to get from Hull to Warrington over the M6.
But the way Hull are playing, exactly.
That's the team football fans would sympathise, though, wouldn't they, with some of the trips they have to make. We've been a bit of grumpy old men to start with, so let's have some positives.
It's an age thing.
Let's have. I mentioned Hull, albeit very briefly. But they're top of the tree. We've got to talk about them.
Yep.
Just how well are the black and whites going, Martyn?
I think it's fabulous to see what Hull are doing, and you know, it doesn't seem that long ago that people were saying that Lee Radford ought to be sacked as the Hull coach. You know, last year and maybe even earlier this year when they had a bit of a stumble early in the season. But I think they've recruited brilliantly. Their pack is tremendous, and I think the key thing about Hull is that they've got a great leader in Gareth Ellis. I really am impressed by Gareth Ellis. He's my candidate for Man of Steel this year. I think, you know, I think captaincy is an often underestimated quality in rugby league. We've seen it with Kevin Sinfield disappearing from Leeds, you know, for this season. And I think Gareth Ellis is showing great leadership at Hull. And, I'm tremendously impressed.
It isn't just leadership either. That was a little bit more than leadership that won the game against Warrington. That was, you know, he didn't seem to have a problem holding onto the ball and throwing 3 blokes out of the way to score what ultimately was the decisive try. But if you're talking Men of Steel, Martyn, I'd throw the guy next door to him in that whole pack into the mix. Because Mark Minicello, you saw his feet again when he hit a flat ball, a line ball, managed to hold on to it. Beautiful feet to sidestep Stephen Ratchford and leave him on.
I think the thing about Ellis, though, is that it's no coincidence that Scott Taylor's playing so well at the moment. When you're in every day against, competing with in training, a guy who is the ultimate professional, clear of injury. I think Ellis is the key driver, and Sneed keeping fit as well and getting more confident each week.
Is Taylor Hull's best signing? Martyn mentioned the signings. We looked at Pritchard, Sikamanu, these players coming in from the NRL, but in reality, Scott Taylor's probably the best player.
Scott Taylor's probably the form prop.
Yeah.
And Liam Watts is doing his bit as well. But Taylor really deserved the Player of the Month accolade he got last month.
I think the other thing is they've taken the pressure off Danny Houghton a little bit. He isn't having to make 60 tackles a match, which means...
Although he still is.
Well, he can if he wants, but the load's being shared, which is really... And speed out the back, that's the other thing. That the games they've lost this year, they've tended not to have Jamie Shaw available or... Carlos Tumivave just gives a different option.
He's a really exciting player, Jamie Shaw, isn't he? You know, he's an excitement machine.
Go back to Wayne Bennett and him being over here. If you can see Jamie Shaw at his best, if you can see Scott Taylor.
Well, if we saw Jamie Shaw on Friday night, I'm afraid he wouldn't.
Hopefully he hadn't landed
because he gave up. You know, he gave up some terrible balls at fullback. But if we're writing that one off as a one-off, then you'd have to say that Shaw is a candidate at least. It'll be interesting to see with Wayne Bennett being over here, if he's in this get-together that apparently the New England coach is having, and which the media in particular are not invited to.
The other team I would say are worthy of mentioning, we touched upon them at the beginning, is Caplan, because they seem to have come up with a formula that really works this year, and it's based around Glenn Stewart playing 80 minutes.
You mean the State of Origin team?
No. It's 12 Frenchmen in the first team, the under-19s, joint top of the
I think there were 11 Frenchmen in the team that beat Saints on
12
Saturday.
the week before. You're looking at Lucas Albert, who's 17. But what they've got is the nous of Glenn Stewart for 80 minutes, who is making the crucial tackles and taking the drives that you need, and then the introduction of Dave Taylor as and when necessary. And if French players are playing off the back of him, I could watch that all day.
And Top Carney.
Carney's injury-free.
The crucial thing for them, though, is that they've got this academy team up and running now, and you know they are actually now producing young players. You know, you look at Lucas Albert, who came in on Saturday. Fouad Yaha scored a Gareth Ellis type try.
Well, Tony Gigo's form this year has been a revelation as well.
Well, he's the most amazingly improved player in the whole of Super League, really, compared to where he was a few years ago.
But if the presence of a Glenn Stewart, a Dave Taylor, a Todd Carney, a Pat Richards even, one of the great wingers for me of the Super League era, if that doesn't rub off on these young Frenchmen, then nothing will. And I think there's a definite correlation with what's happened there and what's happened at Hull with the fit Gareth Ellis and Minicello And
that goes back again to
them.
the beginning, that we're talking about the teams that have been generally the fittest and
That's
have the
right.
best squad and depth to choose from. We don't want the winners ultimately to be the team that don't have people on the treatment team.
No, what I wondered about the Catlans is whether they could survive another loss of Todd Carney. You know, how crucial Todd Carney is.
Well, could Hull survive the loss of Mark Sneyd?
Well, who knows? Who knows?
Possibly with Price on the sidelines.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, that we don't have big enough squads to
No,
have genuine
that's true.
competition for
And we
places
come back,
in
and we
enough
come back
positions.
to the reserves debacle, because I think that has just shamed the competition this year.
I agree.
And I think if Wayne Bennett's looking around at our structures, he's taking Dennis Betts, the witness coach, as his assistant, his eyes and ears on the ground, he's looking around at our structures. He looks at this weekend's fair and he thinks, well, you know, what's plan B? Well, right now there isn't a plan B, because we've, you know, the clubs have quite selfishly given up on it.
Final question for this part, about 20 seconds each on this, please, gents. The Warrington-Hull clash was billed as a possible grand final rehearsal. We hope not, as far as the game itself was concerned. But, and it's prediction time, and I know prediction's just a posh word for guess, at this stage of the season, who will the grand finalists be?
I think you've got to factor in the Challenge Cup as well. That run will possibly determine who might ultimately get to Old Trafford. At the moment, I'd say if Hull keep everybody fit, they'd be my favourites, but too far out to make
Hull
an
against,
educated
give us another name, come on.
I'd like to see Hull Catalan.
Hull Catalan. Martyn.
I'd like to see Hull Catalans, although I think Wigan might have quite a bit to say about this season yet. I wouldn't be at all surprised. You know, Tompkins is back, you know, the half-backs, Williams and Matty Smith. I think Wigan are going to come on a fairly strong late run.
I think Wigan for me are still too one-dimensional. They've not looked like being what they can be all year. I actually, as much as they're a fairy story in the making of Catalans, I actually think we will see a repeat of last Friday night's knock-on-a-thon, and I think it'll be Warrington-Hull.
We'll leave it there for now. Crikey, these three are pretty tough to referee. I wouldn't fancy doing 80 minutes in a rugby league match. We've not mentioned referees thus far. We'll rectify that in the next part. Welcome back to the Arc in Headingley for part 2 of this edition of Backchat. Let's talk referees. Now, if I said Chris Kendall, Chris Campbell, Jack Smith, maybe even a month or two ago, people might say, who? But these are part of the, can we use the term new breed, Martyn, of referees coming through?
I think we can, and I think all three of them have done extremely well, Richard. You know, we've had a lot of criticism of referees fairly recently, but quite interestingly, a lot of it has been at the what you might call the older generation, and not so much at some of these younger guys who are coming through the ranks. And Jack Smith in particular has got a great backstory, of course, because he was a Royal Marine. He was shot and incapacitated for quite a long time in Afghanistan by the Taliban, by a Taliban sniper. That actually ended his playing career. He did have a playing career as an amateur player with Crossfields in Warrington. He couldn't play anymore, so he decided to turn to refereeing. A year or two, probably 18 months ago, he was refereeing junior games, you know, schoolboy games and goodness knows what. Came into the professional game and is risen really like a rocket, you know. And last week refereed the Castleford Widnes game and did extremely well, I thought. Showed a great deal of self-confidence. Didn't go to the video referee every 2 minutes to have decisions confirmed. And you know, because he's a former Royal Marine, one or two of the coaches with a bit of luck might be a bit reluctant to criticise.
Great way of stopping dissent, isn't it? Yeah. By the way, I'll just take you around the back. What we should hope, though, is that they don't get over-scrutinised too early in their career, because I think that's the issue with referees at the moment, that the television we now have, the video refereeing that we now have, that it gets to the point where referees, like players, tend to become a little bit inhibited. These are a breath of fresh air. And I think again we should credit the recruitment that's come under people like Ben Thaler to bring these guys in. The Championship that have road tested them. They were great at the Blackpool Bash as well. And it's absolutely vital that we don't protect them, but we acknowledge the fact that they will make mistakes and they shouldn't be criticised.
But isn't that a truism about referees in general, Phil? I don't think you can wrap these guys up in cotton wool. I think they're as good as their performance is, just like a player. I think criticism is fair so long as it's measured, and so, which can help in the development.
And as long
of
as
a
it's
player.
accurate, of course.
And as long as it's accurate. I mean,
and not in the heat of the immediacy of.
I think the great thing for me is one. Jack Smith was incredibly composed. I love what you said there, Martyn. It wasn't. It was keen to back his own judgment. It was, and that may well be a little bit of these guys not being used to having TV games and being able to go. But they were confident. They've been confident. Both Chris Kendall, Chris Campbell, being confident in their own abilities, which you would hope and expect if they're going to get a run at this stage. Is it the new breed? Well, it's probably time that we have to have, because we've lost some senior referees in recent years. There's been dips in form from what we would call the elite referees.
Competition for places.
And we've also had mysterious disappearances of senior referees.
But I think
that have
the
gone
interesting
in
thing
unexplained.
with Campbell and Smith is that they both have playing careers. And I think that's quite important as well in this new generation coming through, that they understand a little bit more the game that they're refereeing. Yeah,
Chris Campbell was a very useful winger, I seem to recall, whose career again was shortened by injury. So it's great to see a player like that coming into refereeing, and I'm sure there's a lot in what you say, that he actually understands the sort of ethos of the game when it's being played, and probably has that empathy with the players. So, tremendous. I don't think either of those three referees we've mentioned are actually full-time referees at the moment either.
I don't think so.
I think they're all part-time. Yeah. No doubt some of them may be taken on as full-timers. But, you've got to ask...
Though? Has that worked?
Well, I was just going to say that. Does it?
I don't know. I don't know what they stand to gain from it, because they should be able to stay fit enough to run a Super League game at that level. I think that one of the problems of creating the little clique of professionalism that we had first under Stuart Cummins, then Ian Smith, John Sharp, now Steve Ganson, is that they get a little bit isolated and insulated, and they throw up a kind of self-protective wall around themselves, and I don't think that has in the past been good for either them or for us in terms of having the democracy of a game where we can have a debate.
One of the reasons they have put the wall around themselves, though, because of the criticism they get from some coaches.
But it's not going to stop
not just coaches, but from...
No, but particularly coaches, because if we've got a respect policy and we want more young referees to come through at the age levels, and you want it to be seen as a career path, then a coach walking into a press conference saying, I know I'm going to get fined, the fine's wrong. You need to be fined so much that you're not going to say that.
Well, the coaches need to learn, in my opinion. I think it shows mental... I mean, I think the definition of mental weakness is blaming other people for your own problems when they come from yourself. And I think very often coaches who just go into a press conference and blame referees for their club's defeat are just showing mental
Funny how
weakness.
it's always the losing coach, usually. Although Sean Wayne...
Sean Wayne got his retaliation in
Sean
first.
Wayne got his retaliation in first this week, because he was a little bit critical again of Mr Thaler, Ben Thaler, and yet they still won the game, did Wigan. Can I just say, we talk about respect here, and I don't think someone like Jack Smith will struggle to get that. No. But can I just say, I really, really don't like this mate, first name familiarity between officials and players. And it's been a constant bugbear of mine. I think they must sit down with the team sheet and a photo album before the game.
I think some of the refs don't they read it off the back of the shirt?
Well, that may well be, but Ben Thaler, who is probably the most confident of all our referees. I had an instance a couple of weeks ago where he was chatty, quippy, little sarky put downs to the players during the game. And it wasn't a surprise to me that he got 2 or 3 chatting back to him. Now, if he's going to indulge in that and invite them in, and then he sin-binned a player on the stroke of half-time because he got a little bit of lip over.
But is it a fine line between rapport and not? Because one of the criticism we've had in the modern era is that some of the referees have been a bit too standoffish and that there isn't enough rapport.
I think one referee I would mention here in this context, Phil, is James Child, because I think he's improved a lot in that regard. If you look at Child, a couple of years ago...
He was thrown in the deep end too soon.
A couple of years ago, people said, he was too standoffish. He seemed almost arrogant in his manner towards players. I think now he's much better, and as a result of that, I think his refereeing game is better.
I'm just going to jump in there and go back to, I think you mentioned it, Phil, about coaches in post-match press conferences and their comments. They're only making those comments because they're being asked by people like me and you and these two too. So we're all going to solemnly swear that we're no longer going to ask these coaches those questions.
The questions will be asked. It's the response, and it's the measured response, the informed response. It's
they'll just say no comment then. It's boring.
But that, well, not necessarily boring. I just think that we need to make sure that the information that they're giving out is accurate. It's very hard to do that at the end of a game. But I also think that we owe it to the referees that if it's an issue of competence, that there is a procedure in which you can pick that up during the week. But going into a press conference to deflect your performance onto a referee deserves a higher fine.
I disagree fundamentally, Phil, in that my position is that we should encourage more of a debate with the referees. I wouldn't be fining the coaches necessarily. I'd be getting the referees up front to talk about the game if they want. I think we did have a situation with the RFL not long ago, I don't know if they still do it, where there was every week there was a Twitter feed with the referees.
Don't do that anymore.
No.
But that was because of the responses, that's why.
Because people hiding behind Twitter can be abusive. But I just think that if you've ever seen any of our referees in a after-dinner forum, speaking to the public, they're pretty confident guys. They have to be to do the job they do. I think we should be encouraging them to engage in the debate, and I think that would take a lot of the sting out of the criticisms we have.
Yeah, what I would like to see is the RFL, getting the referees to respond formally, perhaps in the middle of the week, after they've analysed all the games at the weekend and where they went right and where they went wrong, and perhaps responding to some of the criticism that they've had. Because, it's not just the coaches who criticise the referees, but TV commentators, perhaps radio commentators too. They get criticism from a lot of directions, it seems to me, and not all that criticism is justified or accurate.
Would that not just breed a defensive mentality?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it would. I think it would be good for the referees to say, look, when a referee gave, a penalty for offside or whatever it was that was crucial to a game's outcome, that was the right decision.
But that's the thing.
Or perhaps that was the wrong one.
It's not crucial to a game's outcome. We've got to get away from this philosophy that the referee making a mistake determines the outcome of a game.
Sometimes it can do, Phil.
I think there's 79 other minutes where it's in the hands of the people that really matter.
It's in the 79th
and we need
minute,
to take the focus off the players.
It's part
and
parcel of the package, isn't it? These guys know what they're going in for when they step out on that field. Some of them relish it more than others, most of it, the fact that we're talking about 3 new guys coming through, stepping up to the plate, impressing all of us who are pretty difficult to impress.
That's true.
I think tells us that the system, in part at least, is working. And certainly we've sticking with the traditional one referee system. I watched the Aussies with 2 referees, and they can, if you think one bad ref is poor, 2 bad refs is absolutely
and even
terrible.
The bunker doesn't work out all the time.
But this is my point, that it's not going to work. You're trying to create a perfect
So get on with
world.
it and talk about it. Don't get hung up on it.
So does that mean we should do away with video referees as well, Phil? Because we're trying to be perfect.
I don't think you can disinvent them.
It's not attainable.
But again, I think the phrase that's been used quite recently is mission creep. That they're deciding on more and more things,
although
and we need to cut that back.
What was that phrase again? Sorry.
Mission creep.
Mission creep.
Well, I think we had a situation not long ago where Ben Thaler was stopping it mid-game and saying, I want to go back to see if something there.
Sure.
And it's almost like he's having a conversation at the bar with his mate, and he doesn't realise that there's however many hundreds of thousands of people sitting there thinking, you can't use it for this. But again, these three young referees, they're sticking to the
hopefully
script
that they're not going to. The problem is over scrutiny, which is where the video referee comes. It's part of this. We're over analysing the referee. We're not talking enough about the players and what they're doing.
So we're over analysing, over scrutinising. I'm pleased we've just done 10 minutes. Let's move on to something different. We mentioned Super League. We've done a lot on Super League. Let's talk about the Championship, and especially those teams that look as though they could be facing Super League sides in the middle eights. There's some cracking stories there. Batley, London, plenty to go at. Who's going to go first?
Well, I think one of the great stories of the season so far is London Broncos. They've come back tremendously under Andrew Henderson. I think when you talk about a coach of the year, we normally talk about a Super League coach of the year, but if we're talking about one in the Championship, then I think he's got to be he's got to be the man this year. It's been great to see them performing so well, and they seem to have found a permanent home, as far as I can gather, at Ealing. Although
as permanent,
you can never be sure about
so
that.
That's 2 years.
You can never be sure about that. You know, one or two of the other clubs. I mean, Lee are still clearly going to be right in the mix at the end. I thought the Lee and Bradford game in the Summer Bash was a tremendous match, and it's such a great shame that we aren't going to have the chance to see Championship clubs having their own grand final this year, given the
we don't
the
see enough
structure
of
of the
them
league.
anyway, do we?
No, we don't see enough of them. And, you know,
I'm with you on Andrew Henderson and London. I think that's a good news story for the London project,
Sure.
and we needed it this season after the disappointments of the last couple. If you're going to throw a coach's name in, you know where I'm going.
There's only one.
John Keir and Batley, you know, they've got they've got less resources than me and Martyn put together at Batley, and they are absolutely turning it up week in, week out. They went down to Sheffield on Friday night, give them a real stuffing against a team that is still nominally full time.
Sure.
You know, what John Keir has done there, and of course he's doing it knowing that he's leaving them to go to Wakefield next season, is just, I think, truly stunning. But that notwithstanding, and the fact that Lee are going to romp home over the winning line first, is the disappointment that Bradford Bulls have been this
that's
season.
The other
That's
big
the big story.
Yeah, that if Bradford were to miss out on the 4 and they play Batley this weekend in what could be a massive game, if Batley are triumphant in that, it almost cements them in the top 4, but it gives Bradford, who are coming off an effective Easter week this week because they've got a midweek game, the most almighty difficulty to get into the top 4. When you look, they've still got to play Halifax as well. Yep. And if Bradford weren't to get in, you really worry about whether they could stay full-time or not.
Well, I'd be amazed if Bradford didn't get in, to be honest, but I think it's going to be one of the interesting elements of the rest of the season to see whether they do. But, I mean, the other really disappointing story in the Championship this year is Sheffield Eagles, as Danny just said, who went full time, and they've blown it, I'm afraid.
And they started with the reserves team. We're going back to the reserves, I know, but they started with one full of all good intentions. Been that early, and in fact, as a result of them and Featherstone both collapsing their reserve teams, Dewsbury had to follow suit because they had guys that just couldn't get a game of rugby.
And I think the other worry with Sheffield is that Ian Swire, who's been with them for 17 years as chairman, has now announced that he's standing down at the end of the season. He's been a real driving force in their reformation and keeping them going. And what is happening with the ground? I know they're still hopeful to get in there next year, but that's almost been a holding position this year.
Do you think this is chaps? Do you think that this is an early symptom or symbol of clubs overstretching themselves on the Super League dream?
Yes. I tell you what that is, Danny. That's a great question for us to start part 3. So that's what we'll do. That question answered by our team of pundits next. Welcome back to the Arc in Headingley for the third and final part of this edition of Backchat. On the way, plenty of NRL and State of Origin talk, but just firstly to answer Danny's question about teams being overstretched in the Championship, very briefly, all three of you, are they, and do we have a team that can make the jump up to Super League from those sides we were mentioning before the break?
I think what I would say is Sheffield are the example of probably how not to do it. Halifax the example of how you should do it. They've stayed part-time longer.
And Batley.
Put resource into infrastructure. I still don't think a team from the Championship can get promoted.
Martyn?
Well, I think Lee could do, potentially. Lee are clearly the most obvious candidates. I think Bradford will come again, personally, as well. I certainly wouldn't write them off. So, but it's hard to see anybody else doing that, even London, who I was giving credit to earlier. Just that could be a step too far for them this year.
And I think, I'm with you guys. Right now, you'd have to say there's only really Lee that are candidates, and that bottom 4 looks to me like it will still be too strong for whoever finishes top. As for Bradford, I fear that if they don't make the top 4, and certainly their form doesn't suggest that they will, that there could be major changes at Alton.
Well, look forward to seeing Batley in Super League in 2017 then. Let's move on to Australia, NRL and Origin. Origin returns next week, Game 2, Wednesday 22nd of June at the Suncorp Stadium, which is live on Premier Sports. Based on what we saw in Game 1, do we need to see some changes personnel-wise, coaching-wise? Laurie Daly would like to see some changes refereeing-wise, but we've already kind of done referees. What needs to change?
He needs to find a pair of halfbacks that work. You know, he has quality guys in the right positions. It looks like on paper, but they just don't perform. He's gone with pretty much the same squad for the second test as Laurie Daly. I was surprised to see Matt Moylan still at full-back. I think he was a little bit frail in the first match. It's the same again pretty much, apart from Nate Miles being out for Queensland, and it's difficult to see them, you know, having turned New South Wales over on their home territory, it's hard to see them being beaten at Suncorp. I think that this could end up being all over by next Wednesday.
And New South Wales just seem too conservative in everything they do at the moment. They've got some great young players, but they're sticking with a half-back partnership that won't spread the ball. So what, you know, again, what does somebody like Valentine Holmes have to do to get in the team? The pack is younger, New South Wales, they're building for the future, but I just don't see how you get over the Queensland forwards at Suncorp.
I'm afraid Australian Rugby League seems to be, you know, affected by this disease of excessive caution at the moment. Very conservative style of play, a rather dull style of play if we're really honest about it, and I thought New South Wales showed that in spades in the first game. They were slightly unlucky not to win it though, because they had a video referee decision you know, that went against them. I thought it was very touch and go. I've got to say, I think I would have given it to them. And probably it would have been better for the series if they'd won the first game.
It certainly would have been.
You know, but I wouldn't write them off in terms of going up to Queensland. We often find in State of Origin that a team wins when its back's against the wall. I remember last year,
though, they've got Jonathan Thurston.
Well, yeah. I mean, last year, the third game, New South Wales went up to Lang Park, you know, and it was 1-1 at that stage, and everybody thought that this was New South Wales' year, and they got walloped 52-6. So, you know, you can never say for sure if the Queenslanders turn it on, they will be blasted, but don't write them off.
I'm interested in what you say about them both being overly cautious. I think you're right. I think New South Wales have to throw a little bit of caution to the wind, and I think it is probably a symptom of having new coach, you know, a new coach certainly for Queensland in the job. But I've always thought that there was a separate set of rules that they played Origin by. You could take a bloke's head off and it was play on. You know, you had to decapitate him to give a penalty. And it used to be that they got that fire out of their bellies early on, and we settled down and had a really great rugby match. It is now so sanitised. Is the NRL. The two referees will not allow anything. You know, you can't throw a punch, so you get 26 guys just pushing like so many Italian waiters.
They've got massive image problems though, haven't they, in Australia? Well, perhaps we don't know about.
They've talked themselves into their image problems then, but it has absolutely taken away from the spectacle that always was the gladiatorial form of Origin. I don't think it's helped. I think the bunker certainly didn't help that first test, that first Origin match. And actually, I think it's going on trial over the next two games as to just how good a product it is anymore.
I agree with that, actually. I don't think
the tickets haven't sold out yet for Suncorp this week, which is almost unheard of.
Incredible, really, isn't it, that? And, you know, they do have an image problem, but I think they're misunderstanding it, actually. I think they're reacting all the time to criticism from various sections of the media.
They're getting very politically
and
correct.
they're not responding to it. They're just reacting to it, but not really coming back and responding to it. It's like, you know, this thing we mentioned earlier about Eddie Jones saying rugby league isn't a skillful game. Who's countered that in Australia? Who's countered it? I've not seen anybody, you know, coming back at him and saying that's a load of rubbish. Don't talk nonsense. You know, the Australian, the NRL and the Australian Rugby League seem to me to be absolutely hopeless at PR. if we're really
well,
honest
they're not
about
alone
it.
in that, Martyn.
No.
And I think we are getting a bit hung up on origin, which can be a little bit formulaic and is, let's face it.
But it's always been very exciting.
But the elite level of any sport at the moment, the Rugby Union World Cup final, the Football World Cup final, State of Origin, it becomes not making a mistake. And I think there's something absorbing about that. But what you need on a weekly basis is the kind of rugby that we are seeing in the NRL at the moment.
Thank you, Phil.
And I think over the last sort of year, we've moved away from perhaps that thuggery element that you were talking about, but the skill levels have increased. The wingers scoring try. Cronulla's story is magnificent.
The actual NRL weekly action is just at a level that I've never seen before.
And if you go back to why Queensland have been so dominant, which again is one of the reasons why people aren't as enamoured about State of Origin, it's because Brisbane and North Queensland are the two best teams with the great players in it. And they are serving up some fabulous rugby league at the moment.
But
you can't take your eyes off
Cronulla, we'll talk, because that's a great story.
That's a fabulous story.
Cronulla have got as many trophies in their cabinet as Danny and I have hairs on our head. People will know that they are massively underachieving for years and years, never won it. Yeah. But could they this year? Would anybody be as bold to say that they could?
There's no doubt about it. You know, they are a great side. They're top of the competition alongside Melbourne just about, and there's every reason to think that they could win it. Although I think that, you know, if they're going to beat I think Melbourne are the outstanding team this year in the NRL. So anybody who's going to win it has to get past them somehow. Yeah,
I mean, Brisbane broke a little bit of a duck at the weekend. They got a win that they really needed, because I think they were looking at down the barrel of 5 straight defeats. And I think Origin time of year is always difficult for the top NRL clubs, because North Queensland and Brisbane have so many players who are having to double up, having played for the Maroons. You know, Melbourne and Cronulla have 3-4 men in the New South Wales squad, so they're going to be hit a little bit. So there's always a little bit of a wobble mid-season, but I think that is one competition where you do get down to playoff time, and anyone in that top 8 can make it. And I think the big story this year is who isn't in that 8, because you've got the 3 times minor premiers Sydney Roosters,
that's an astonishing
gone, done and dusted, and the South Sydney Rabbitohs look like they couldn't buy a win.
Right? And New Zealand Warriors are only just coming back to form, but are still outside of that.
Can Cronulla win it? Absolutely.
I think the great thing about Cronulla is the mix they've got at the moment. They've got Paul Gallen and Greg Bird coming to the end of illustrious careers that haven't really achieved domestically what they wanted to, and you've got guys like Valentine Holmes and Jack Bird coming through that are just stars of the next generation. It's a great mix there.
The great story about
the other one is the story of what they've had to overcome.
Absolutely.
The Asada drug story.
Yeah.
Tore the club apart.
Yeah.
To rebuild so quickly, to put themselves in a position where they could win the competition, is astonishing.
Somebody's done some great work there, haven't they? I mean, I don't know the club well enough to know exactly who to credit for that, but it has been a remarkable story, and I think it would be a great story for the NRL if they did win it.
They're still probably only 4th favourites out of that top 4,
absolutely.
Because they are joint top with Melbourne. Brisbane and North Queensland have had a little bit of a blip, but that is where the pedigree is.
Sure.
So, but even so, it's going to make for a terrific close to the season.
It might bring a nice symmetry to the programme. We started by talking about Wayne Bennett being over here. We always talk about the English players over there, but we could see at the end of the year a starting pack, certainly, all of NRL-based players. We've also got the fact that quite possibly the best player in the world at the moment is from Hull, in Canberra, in Josh Hodgson.
I don't know about the best player in the world, but he's certainly been the form hooker in the NRL.
People are talking him up. When I was at Warrington on Friday night, some of the players there were saying he's the Dally M favourite.
And the best back rower in the comp is probably Elliot Whitehead right now. You know, you could certainly, and the best prop is definitely James Graham. So you go Graham, Hodge, and one of the Burgess twins. Then you've got Elliot Whitehead and Mike Cooper, who's coming home from St George Illawarra, and then Sam Burgess anchoring the pack. And I think you'd put that 6 up against any 6 in the world.
Yeah. I think the irony
Let's hope they all stay fit.
We started talking about, are we overexposing the players here, playing too much rugby? The irony is that if the bulk of the squad comes from the NRL, England have never had a better chance of winning the Four Nations or the World Cup.
But that's exactly New Zealand's story.
Yeah.
They still only have the Warriors and a semi-pro competition down there. The fact is that it's their being embedded in the NRL that has built the New Zealand.
Well, and we're on the verge of losing
team.
our man of steel to Australia as well, if the stories are to be believed.
If anybody will take him, yeah.
Do you think they will?
Well, there's always someone.
They'll want him, but they might not want to pay a transfer fee
Not
of
300,000.
And I think there's a little bit of baggage in the backstory that hasn't come out, and that'll get around. And the problem that he has with saying when he's going in mid-season is that everybody's spent up to the salary cap wherever you're looking, Richard, and this £300,000, £600,000 Aussie dollars, given what New Zealand Warriors lost on their failed experiment with Sam Tompkins. And the fact that Zach has been really out of form,
I suspect that transfer fee is a red herring.
Well, it may well be.
It's a PR thing.
Okay, but even so.
But I think he will go, in answer to your question.
Do you think he'll be signed to go next year?
No, I think he's.
I think he's decided to go straight away.
I think Leeds would like to see the back of him, and he's too good a player with too much potential for someone not to take a flyer.
I also think that it frees up salary cap money for Leeds that they haven't got at the moment to maybe bring in 1 or 2 players, which they would quite like to do at this stage of the season.
Where's he going then?
Well, I'd like to see him go to Canberra because, knowing him a little bit, I think he needs a support structure. So I think if he goes out of the spotlight of Sydney and he's got Josh Hodgson and Elliot Whitehead, particularly Elliot, who I think get on quite well from the England point of view, I think he needs people around him.
Yeah.
I would worry for him if he didn't. I wouldn't put him in the fishbowl of Sydney.
But I also know that Gold Coast have made an inquiry
That's
about
exactly the place he shouldn't be going.
I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure that's
Party
the best
Central.
place.
No, let's
if he's got good advice, don't go to the Gold Coast.
No. And then, of course, the interesting one is who Leeds would then spend the money on. But because John Bateman's out of favour at Wigan.
Again, could be going to the NRL.
Do you think well, that was my next question. Is John Bateman Australia bound?
Well, again, he's good enough.
Again, we
talk about PR. How badly has that been handled by Wigan?
Yeah.
Well, how bad does Rugby League handle PR?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, again, we've only just had the idea that Salford are going to be charged for an incident that happened at Easter.
Yeah.
Which again is nonsense.
So
yeah, PR isn't Rugby League's strong point anywhere in the world, is it?
And in that, we're probably the match of the NRL. We can compete with them.
I was going to say not anywhere in the world apart from Canada, it seems to me.
Yeah. And that's all it is in Canada. It's PR.
Do you think we are going to see many Super League players this term, aside from your Batemans and your Hardacres who we've mentioned, making the trip down to Australia? We already know that Greg Eden and Mike Cooper are coming back.
Well, they don't go. I don't think that there's a player that wouldn't go and chance their arm, because one, their salary cap is about to go through the roof, as is their minimum wage, which would be a massive hike, quite apart from the exposure and the lifestyle, Richard. It's a question of which of our players does the NRL want, because they sit and watch and they cherry pick.
Well, I think you picked on it as well with Josh Hodgson. We wouldn't have said maybe a year ago that he'd be ripping it up in the NRL. Somebody's looked at him and said he fits the style that we want to play here, and in that environment he is exceeding to the absolute maximum potential. There'll be other players that probably we don't think would be a real hit in the NRL that will be.
The other thing we've got to think very carefully about really in our game is a lot of kids coming through the academy, the under-19s, they're coming through and they've not got reserve grade sides to play in. They're going to be cherry picked by, if you talk to agents, those are the kids they're trying to push into Australia. So instead of playing for reserve grade sides in Super League, they're going to be playing for reserve grade sides and feeder teams.
I'd
in
really
the NRL.
worry if Ben Curry left, for example. I think he is a project that's been through the academy system 5 years. He's now looking as though
the real deal.
First team on the team sheet for Wayne Bennett, can play centre if he needs him, or second row. If I was an Aussie club, I'd just be saying, right, well, whatever Warrington are paying you, 5 times that.
I think as long as players are going and then coming back, as we've said, Mike Cooper and
is that a good
Greg
look?
Eden. Well,
Joe Burgess comes back and he hasn't made it at the Roosters, who've had a bad year.
Well,
is that
he's played himself out of an England spot as Joe Burgess, hasn't he? Just by
what does that look like for us with a repository of guys who
if Joe Burgess hasn't been getting in the Roosters side and the Roosters have been losing most weeks, that's probably not a bad thing.
Gentlemen, time's beaten us, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
So let's just look ahead to the fixtures in the NRL this weekend. It's round 15 in Australia. On Friday, the Rabbitohs host the Eels at the ANZ Stadium. The Dragons take on the Storm, and that's at 10:30 on Saturday morning, live on Premier Sports, as is the Rabbitohs Eels game. You'll see all these games, by the way. On Sunday, it's the Warriors against the Roosters. That's a 7 o'clock in the morning start. And on Monday the 20th, it's the Titans against the Sea Eagles. That's a 10 o'clock kickoff. The two games in Origin that you've got to look forward to. We've mentioned one in detail. Next Wednesday, the 22nd of June, Queensland, New South Wales, up at the Suncourt Stadium. That's at 11 o'clock in the morning. And New South Wales, Queensland, Game 3, potentially the decider, fingers crossed for the neutrals, 13th of July. That's an 11 o'clock start, and you can check out all this and more at www.premiersports.tv. So that's about it for this edition of Back Chat. My thanks to Danny Lockwood, Martyn, Sadler and Phil Caplan. Dave Woods will be back in this seat next time. I'm going to find out a little bit more about Mission Creep now off Phil. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.